The American political landscape is currently engulfed in a confluence of crises that cut across domestic governance, international relations, and the integrity of democratic institutions. Within just a few weeks, a series of developments have collided to produce a highly combustible environment, both in Washington and beyond. These events are not isolated, rather, they form interconnected threads in a tapestry of political polarization, institutional mistrust, and legal brinkmanship. At the center of public attention is the escalation of the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, with the House Oversight Committee issuing subpoenas to some of the most recognizable names in American politics, including Bill and Hillary Clinton, former attorneys general from both Republican and Democratic administrations, and former FBI directors. This high-profile move is reigniting debates over accountability, selective enforcement, and the politicization of justice. Simultaneously, on the grassroots level, a contentious town hall in Nebraska featuring Republican Representative Mike Flood has underscored the growing hostility between elected officials and their constituents, fueled by sharp disagreements on economic policy, healthcare, and political ethics. In Texas, a battle over mid-cycle redistricting, widely condemned as gerrymandering, has led Democratic lawmakers to flee the state, prompting the Republican governor to issue civil arrest warrants and threaten removal from office. On the international stage, the entanglement between Donald Trump and former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has taken an unexpected turn, with Bolsonaro under house arrest for actions tied to seeking Trump's political support. Meanwhile, Trump allies are also pushing an investigation into alleged misconduct by Obama-era officials in assessing Russian interference in the 2016 election, a move critics see as an attempt to rewrite history and distract from present controversies. Taken together, these developments illuminate a political system under strain, where legal processes, electoral strategies, and partisan narratives intertwine, each feeding into an escalating cycle of confrontation with potentially far-reaching consequences for the stability of American governance. Epstein investigation escalates. The Jeffrey Epstein case has long been a political and cultural flashpoint in the United States, but the latest moves from the House Oversight Committee have pushed it into an even more volatile phase. This is no longer simply about uncovering the truth behind Epstein's criminal network. It has become a test case for how much transparency the American public can demand from its political elites and whether justice is truly blind when powerful names are involved. 1. House Oversight Committee action. On the morning of the announcement, Committee Chair James Comer revealed a sweeping set of subpoenas targeting some of the most prominent figures in U.S. political history. The list reads like a bipartisan who's who: Bill and Hillary Clinton, former attorneys General Bill Barr, Merrick Garland, Loretta Lynch, Eric Holder, Jeff Sessions, and Alberto Gonzales, as well as former FBI directors James Comey and Robert Mueller. These subpoenas demand sworn depositions from each individual between August and October, alongside an order to the Department of Justice to hand over the complete and unredacted Epstein files no later than August 19. By complete, Comer emphasized that he wanted all internal communications, investigative records, and any materials related to Epstein's known associates. The letters issued to each target contain pointed and, in some cases, deeply personal accusations. In the letter to Bill Clinton, Comer referenced the former president's own admission that he had flown on Epstein's private jet at least 4 times between 2002 and 2003. One of those trips allegedly included an incident in which Clinton received a massage from one of Epstein's identified victims. The letter also cited Clinton's alleged personal closeness with Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's convicted co-conspirator, and attendance at a private dinner with her in 2014, years after public reports linked her to sex trafficking of minors. The letter to Hillary Clinton followed a similar pattern, highlighting her apparent close relationship with Epstein and pointing out that Maxwell's nephew had worked on her 2008 presidential campaign before securing a position at the State Department during her tenure as Secretary of State. For the former attorneys general and FBI directors, the committee's letters were less personal and more institutional. They focused on what role the DOJ and FBI leadership played in either investigating or, as some critics allege, mishandling Epstein-related cases during their respective terms. To Bill Barr, Comer noted that his second stint as Attorney General, 2019 to 2020, coincided with Epstein's federal sex trafficking charges and his death in federal custody, a death officially ruled a suicide but still the subject of intense public skepticism. 2. Victims' open letters and criticism of DOJ. The subpoenas landed against the backdrop of growing frustration from Epstein's victims, 2 of whom sent scathing open letters to a federal judge in Manhattan. Writing anonymously to protect their identities, the victims expressed disdain, disgust, and fear over how the U.S. Department of Justice has handled the promised release of the Epstein Files. One victim accused the DOJ of using the victims as pawns in political warfare and prolonging the story to shield powerful and wealthy friends, not enemies. The letter openly questioned the circumstances of Epstein's death, pointedly asking, under whose watch? Oh, was it Trump's DOJ? Interesting. The author called for full transparency, with only the minimal redactions necessary to protect victim identities, and demanded that the case be brought to a close so survivors could begin to heal. The second letter echoed these concerns and warned of the media frenzy surrounding the case. This victim urged the court to appoint a third-party reviewer to ensure no victim's name or likeness would be exposed in the event of a public document release. For both, the underlying message was clear: the U.S. justice system has failed them, and continued secrecy only deepens that wound. 3. Political selectivity debate. While the subpoenas have been hailed by some as a step toward long overdue accountability, they have also triggered accusations of political selectivity. Critics quickly pointed out that Donald Trump, who had a documented personal history with Epstein, including being photographed together and appearing on flight logs, was conspicuously absent from the list of subpoenaed individuals. The omission has fueled speculation that the investigation could be weaponized against certain political factions while sparing others, especially given Comer's alignment with the House Republican leadership. For many observers, this selective focus risks undermining the legitimacy of the committee's stated mission. In high-profile corruption and abuse cases, even the appearance of partisanship can erode public confidence in the process. This perception is compounded by the broader political climate, where virtually every investigation of national significance is interpreted through a partisan lens. When one set of political figures is aggressively pursued while others with similar connections remain untouched, it feeds the belief that justice in America operates under a two-tiered system, one for the powerful allies, and another for their opponents. Analysis: the stakes of transparency. The Epstein scandal has always been about more than one man's crimes. It is about networks of influence, the complicity of institutions, and the accountability of elites who operate in spaces largely shielded from public scrutiny. By issuing such high-profile subpoenas, the House Oversight Committee has raised the stakes not just for the individuals named, but for the credibility of Congress itself. If the DOJ complies fully with the committee's demands and the files are released with only necessary redactions, it could represent a significant moment for governmental transparency. Conversely, if the process devolves into selective leaks, partisan grandstanding, or legal stonewalling, it could cement public cynicism for years to come. The victims' letters are perhaps the clearest moral compass in this saga. They remind us that beyond the politics, the core of the case is about survivors of abuse seeking justice. Yet their voices risk being drowned out by the political theater surrounding the investigation. Whether lawmakers and the DOJ can resist that gravitational pull and prioritize truth over partisanship will determine whether the Epstein case ends as a turning point for accountability or yet another cautionary tale in the erosion of trust in American institutions. Grassroots backlash: the Mike Flood Town Hall. The tension between elected officials and the public has been steadily escalating across the United States, but rarely is it captured as vividly as it was during Representative Mike Flood's recent town hall in Lincoln, Nebraska. What was ostensibly intended as a routine engagement with constituents quickly morphed into a case study of grassroots backlash, illustrating the widening gap between policymakers and the communities they represent. 1. Context and setup. Lincoln, while situated in a state that votes reliably Republican, is among Nebraska's more politically progressive enclaves. When the Nebraska Democratic Party learned that Representative Flood, a Republican representing a solidly red district, planned a public town hall, they mobilized their base. The event's details were posted online with the thinly veiled encouragement to know what to do. The result was a packed room of roughly 700 attendees, many of whom were not part of Flood's core Republican constituency. While the district itself is considered a safe seat, Flood won it by more than 20 points in the last election. The audience that night was primed for confrontation. From the moment Flood stepped onto the stage, the political dynamic was less representative democracy and more adversarial cross-examination. 2. Policy-driven hostility. The hostility began almost immediately when Flood tried to discuss a recent piece of legislation, dubbed by supporters as the Big Beautiful Bill. Before he could elaborate, the heckling started. Flood attempted to explain his votes, promising that everyone would have the chance to ask questions. But the crowd's reaction, sustained boos and jeers, set the tone for the rest of the night. Policy grievances dominated the exchanges. Audience members challenged Flood over his support for cuts to Medicaid and SNAP benefits, accusing him of targeting vulnerable populations while protecting corporate interests. When Flood defended the 2017 Trump tax cuts, claiming they spurred explosive growth, critics in the room countered with chants and pointed questions about the long-term impact on the national debt. The conversation soon veered into the territory of political morality. One attendee accused Flood of being complicit in fascism, citing his silence on the January 6 Capitol attack and Republican calls to pardon those convicted in connection with it. Others accused him of prioritizing capital over the working class, pointing out that tax advantages for billionaires seemed permanent while relief for ordinary workers was piecemeal and conditional. Flood's attempts to rebut these claims often fell flat. His statement that fascists don't hold town halls drew scoffs, as did his assertion that the Republican Party now represents the heart and soul of the working class. In this crowd, such claims were met with skepticism, if not outright derision. 3. Epstein Files question and misstatements. The night's contentious energy reached a new peak when a constituent directly asked, "Why are you covering up the Epstein Files?" Flood responded by expressing support for releasing the records and backing House Oversight Chair James Comer's subpoena efforts. He mentioned that Ghislaine Maxwell was scheduled to testify later in the month and framed himself as aligned with efforts to protect victims while ensuring transparency. However, his comments contained inaccuracies. In reality, Maxwell's testimony had been postponed until at least October to allow the Supreme Court to decide whether to review her case. Furthermore, the resolution Flood referenced was non-binding, meaning it would not compel the Trump administration or any administration to release the documents. For critics in the room, these misstatements reinforced a narrative that political promises around transparency often serve as symbolic gestures rather than actionable commitments. In a political environment already clouded by selective accountability, the gap between rhetoric and reality becomes ammunition for public distrust. 4. Political significance. Flood's experience in Lincoln underscores a broader trend. In-person town halls have become political minefields for incumbents, especially in swing or opposition-heavy locales. The New York Times has noted that among the 35 House Republicans targeted by Democrats for 2024, only one other member, Representative Brian Steil, has held an in-person town hall, and his event also spiraled into confrontation. For Republican leadership, the lesson is clear. Back in March, the chair of the House Republican campaign arm advised members to replace physical town halls with virtual events, where questions can be screened in advance. After Lincoln, Flood himself announced that this would be his third and final in-person town hall for the year, promising to give you all a break. While Lincoln's audience may not reflect the political leanings of Flood's district as a whole, the optics of the event carry national resonance. In an election cycle where both parties are battling low approval ratings and widespread voter disillusionment, such moments become potent political theater evidence, depending on perspective, of democratic engagement or of a deepening divide between voters and their representatives. Texas gerrymandering confrontation. The political standoff unfolding in Texas is more than a state-level dispute over district boundaries. It is a case study in how redistricting, once a decennial process tied to the U.S. Census, is being transformed into a weapon of continuous partisan warfare. What began as a special legislative session ostensibly devoted to disaster relief has morphed into an all-out confrontation over electoral power, fueled by the influence of former President Donald Trump and executed by Governor Greg Abbott's Republican majority. 1. The special session and quorum break. In late July, Governor Abbott called a special session of the Texas legislature. On paper, the agenda included urgent matters, flood relief in the wake of devastating storms, property tax cuts, and unexpectedly, a mid-cycle redistricting plan. The latter proposal, pushed at Trump's urging, aimed to redraw congressional districts to create 5 additional Republican seats in the U.S. House. Democrats immediately denounced the move as an unconstitutional gerrymander, given that redistricting is traditionally conducted only once every 10 years after the census. They argued that the proposed map would further entrench Republican overrepresentation, silencing urban, minority-heavy districts and distorting the principle of one person, one vote. With Republicans holding enough seats to pass the measure but lacking the two-thirds quorum required to conduct business, Texas Democrats employed one of the few tools available to them: they left the state. By fleeing to jurisdictions outside Texas, they effectively froze legislative activity, making it impossible to proceed with either the redistricting bill or the disaster relief measures tied to the same session. 2. Abbott's response and legal maneuvers. Governor Abbott responded with a mixture of political framing and aggressive legal tactics. He accused Democrats of abandoning their duty and holding flood relief and property tax cuts hostage. In a series of public statements, he painted the walkout as a betrayal of Texans affected by recent disasters, sidestepping the redistricting controversy at the heart of the conflict. Abbott then authorized the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, to locate and detain the absent lawmakers. Civil arrest warrants were issued by the Texas House Speaker, and Abbott instructed the Texas Rangers to investigate whether Democratic members had violated bribery laws by soliciting or accepting funds to break quorum. He directed that any evidence be quickly forwarded to prosecutors. The legality of these moves is murky. Under Texas law, non-criminal warrants like these carry little enforceability outside state lines. In 2021, the all-Republican Texas Supreme Court had already ruled that quorum breaks are explicitly allowed under the state constitution. This precedent casts doubt on whether Abbott's threats, including talk of removing lawmakers from office, would survive judicial review. Nevertheless, the optics are powerful: a governor using state law enforcement to pursue political adversaries across state borders, creating a scene more reminiscent of a constitutional crisis than a legislative debate. 3. Broader implications. Beyond the immediate dispute, the Texas episode exposes the risks of perpetual redistricting. Traditionally, both major parties have engaged in gerrymandering, but the practice was constrained by the 10-year census cycle. Breaking the norm threatens to trigger a cascade effect. If one state redraws its maps mid-cycle to maximize partisan gain, others will feel compelled to follow suit or risk permanent disadvantage. Already, Democratic-led states are signaling they may retaliate. California Governor Gavin Newsom has openly threatened to gerrymander the hell out of California if Texas proceeds. In New York, lawmakers are exploring a constitutional amendment to allow redistricting outside the census schedule. Illinois has similarly floated the idea of preemptive map changes. Such escalation would be disastrous for representational integrity. In Texas, Republicans currently hold 25 of 37 congressional seats, roughly 65%, despite the fact that Donald Trump won only 56% of the statewide vote in 2020. If the proposed mid-cycle gerrymander adds 5 more GOP seats, Republicans would control nearly 79% of the delegation, a figure wildly disproportionate to the electorate's actual preferences. This imbalance has both legal and democratic consequences. Legally, it raises potential Voting Rights Act challenges, especially if minority communities are cracked or packed to dilute their influence. Democratically, it deepens voter cynicism, reinforcing the belief that election outcomes are engineered in legislative chambers rather than decided at the ballot box. 4. The political calculus. From Trump's perspective, Texas is a key battlefield for maintaining a Republican majority in the U.S. House. His public call to "get me 5 seats" underscores the national stakes of the fight. For Abbott, aligning with Trump serves dual purposes: bolstering his conservative credentials ahead of any future presidential aspirations and cementing GOP dominance in Texas for the next decade or more. For Democrats, the walkout is a high-risk maneuver. By stalling legislative business, they have drawn national attention to the redistricting battle, but they also open themselves to accusations of neglecting disaster relief, a potent talking point for Republicans. The impasse shows no signs of resolution. As of the most recent session, the Texas House once again failed to achieve a quorum, forcing adjournment. Abbott has threatened continued special sessions until Democrats return, while Democratic leaders insist they will not come back under the current agenda. 5. Why this matters beyond Texas. The Texas standoff is a preview of the national redistricting wars that could define the next decade. If mid-cycle gerrymanders become normalized, American politics risks devolving into an endless loop of map redraws, each one eroding the link between voter intent and legislative representation. In such a scenario, the idea of fair elections becomes a legal fiction, and partisan control of state houses translates directly into engineered dominance in Congress. This is not merely a local power struggle, it is a stress test for federal democracy itself, one that could set a precedent for political gamesmanship across all 50 states. The Trump-Bolsonaro entanglement. The relationship between former U.S. President Donald Trump and Brazil's former President Jair Bolsonaro has long been a subject of fascination for political analysts. Both men built political brands around right-wing populism, skepticism toward mainstream media, and allegations of electoral fraud when confronted with defeat. But in recent weeks, that affinity has transformed from ideological camaraderie into a complex legal and diplomatic entanglement, one with significant consequences for both countries' politics. 1. Bolsonaro's legal troubles. Bolsonaro is now under house arrest, accused of violating a court order that restricted his public communications and movements. The order itself stemmed from allegations that he had been seeking Trump's help to undermine Brazil's judiciary and challenge his own legal troubles. The Brazilian ex-president is already facing a cascade of serious charges. These include plotting to overturn the results of the 2022 election, in which he lost to Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, allegedly attempting to poison his successor, and even conspiring to assassinate a Supreme Court justice overseeing investigations into him. These accusations, if proven, paint a picture of a former head of state willing to employ extreme measures to cling to influence. Bolsonaro's political playbook has mirrored Trump's in key moments. After his electoral defeat, he refused to concede and claimed, without evidence, that fraud in Brazil's electronic voting system had stolen the election from him. The rhetoric fueled an uprising on January 8, 2023, when thousands of his supporters stormed Brazil's presidential palace, Supreme Court building, and Congress in a scene eerily reminiscent of the January 6 Capitol attack in Washington. The fallout from that insurrection was severe. Brazil's top electoral court barred Bolsonaro from holding public office until 2030, effectively ending his near-term political career. By the time the latest house arrest order came down, Bolsonaro was already facing the real possibility of a criminal conviction and significant prison time. 2. Trump's intervention and economic measures. Bolsonaro's personal and political ties to Trump and to Trump's political network run deep. One of Bolsonaro's sons, who served as a congressman, relocated to the United States and began lobbying the White House on his father's behalf. Reports indicate he has been a frequent presence in Washington since March, seeking sympathetic ears in Trump-aligned circles. These overtures appear to have yielded results. Last month, Trump publicly denounced the Brazilian judiciary's cases against Bolsonaro as a witch hunt, echoing the language he uses to describe his own legal troubles in the U.S. He threatened to impose steep tariffs on Brazilian imports unless Bolsonaro was treated fairly. Shortly thereafter, the Trump administration followed through, raising tariffs on Brazilian goods to 50%, the highest rate imposed on any country during Trump's tenure. The stated justification included a non-existent trade deficit, a claim economists and trade analysts swiftly debunked. In parallel, the White House levied sanctions on a Brazilian Supreme Court justice, the same justice overseeing Bolsonaro's case, accusing him of arbitrary pretrial detentions and suppressing freedom of expression. The judge responded forcefully, calling the sanctions part of an illegal and immoral effort to obstruct justice orchestrated by Bolsonaro's allies and abetted by a foreign head of state, an unmistakable reference to Trump. 3. The court order and its violation. The court order that Bolsonaro was accused of violating was originally issued to curb his ability to influence ongoing investigations. It required him to wear an electronic ankle monitor, banned him from using social media, and prohibited indirect communication with his political base through allies' platforms. The violation came when Bolsonaro appeared virtually at a political rally via a phone call with another of his sons, who is currently a senator in Brazil. During that call, Bolsonaro allegedly made statements interpreted as incitement against the Supreme Court and explicit appeals for foreign intervention in Brazil's judiciary. The presiding justice concluded that this conduct was even more severe and defiant than prior incidents, justifying the shift to house arrest. Bolsonaro's legal team denies any wrongdoing and has vowed to appeal. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department quickly condemned the Brazilian court's actions, accusing the judge of using legal mechanisms to suppress opposition, a move that aligned Washington's position even more closely with Bolsonaro's defense narrative. 4. Political fallout in Brazil and the United States. If Bolsonaro hoped that Trump's intervention would shift the political landscape in his favor, the results so far suggest the opposite. Many Brazilians, particularly those who support Lula's government, have reacted with anger to what they perceive as foreign meddling in domestic legal affairs. The standoff has, if anything, boosted Lula's approval ratings by portraying him as a leader standing up to external pressure. For Trump, the calculus is mixed. Supporting Bolsonaro reinforces his brand as a defender of like-minded leaders targeted by what he calls corrupt establishments. But it also ties him more closely to a figure facing grave criminal allegations abroad, including charges of attempted political violence. Should Bolsonaro be convicted, Trump's defense of him could be used to question his judgment in aligning with political allies who share his confrontational style but also his legal vulnerabilities. At the international level, the episode raises uncomfortable questions about the use of U.S. foreign policy as a political shield for favored leaders, and whether such moves undermine America's stated commitment to the rule of law. With both men out of office but still influential in their respective countries' politics, the Trump-Bolsonaro connection is likely to remain a flashpoint in the increasingly blurred space between domestic politics and foreign affairs. Obama-era Russia interference probe. The announcement of a new investigation into the Obama administration's handling of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election has reignited one of the most divisive political narratives of the past decade. While the facts surrounding Moscow's efforts to sway the U.S. vote have been extensively documented in multiple bipartisan reports, the decision by Attorney General Pam Bondi to reopen the matter underscores how unresolved and politically useful this chapter remains for allies of former President Donald Trump. 1. Pam Bondi's investigation announcement. In early August, Bondi declared that the Department of Justice would probe whether senior Obama-era officials manipulated intelligence assessments related to Russia's interference in the 2016 election. A source familiar with the matter told the Associated Press that Bondi had directed a prosecutor to present evidence to a grand jury, suggesting that the inquiry could lead to criminal charges against former government officials. Bondi's public framing was couched in terms of transparency and accountability. She argued that the American people deserve the truth about whether partisan bias influenced official intelligence conclusions during a presidential election year. While she did not name specific targets, the scope implied potential scrutiny of senior figures in the intelligence community and the Obama White House. For Trump allies, the investigation offers a chance to retroactively validate claims that his presidency was undermined from the outset by a politically motivated Russia hoax. For critics, it is yet another example of using prosecutorial power to relitigate settled matters for partisan gain. 2. Historical findings versus new claims. The public record on Russian interference is substantial. In 2019, the Mueller report concluded that the Russian government had engaged in a sweeping and systematic effort to influence the 2016 election in Trump's favor. While the investigation did not establish a criminal conspiracy between Trump's campaign and Moscow, it documented numerous contacts between Trump associates and Russian-linked individuals. The following year, a bipartisan investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee reaffirmed these findings, concluding that Russia's interference was real, that it was designed to help Trump, and that Obama-era officials acted without political bias in their intelligence assessments. The report was endorsed by both Republicans and Democrats on the committee, including Senator Marco Rubio, who at the time chaired the panel. These prior conclusions make Bondi's new probe controversial. No credible evidence has emerged suggesting that Obama officials falsified intelligence or acted in bad faith. Instead, multiple reviews have found that intelligence agencies assessed the situation accurately and professionally, even amid the political sensitivity of an ongoing presidential campaign. 3. Political motives and risks. Given this backdrop, the timing and substance of Bondi's move have drawn sharp criticism. A former DOJ official described the investigation to NBC News as a political stunt lacking logical, rational basis. By resurrecting a politically charged narrative that has been exhaustively investigated, Bondi risks undermining confidence in the impartiality of the Justice Department. For Trump, however, the political value is clear. He can use the probe to reinforce his long-standing claims that he was the victim of a deep state conspiracy, tying it rhetorically to his other grievances, including the current Epstein investigation and multiple criminal indictments he faces. The renewed focus on 2016 allows him to reframe his presidency as embattled from the start, potentially rallying his base around a familiar grievance heading into the 2024 election season. The risks extend beyond domestic politics. Reopening a settled intelligence matter could signal to foreign adversaries that U.S. intelligence assessments are subject to political revisionism, potentially weakening deterrence. It also risks alienating career intelligence professionals, whose work depends on maintaining credibility across partisan divides. In the end, Bondi's investigation is less about uncovering new facts than about reshaping the political narrative. Whether it yields indictments or quietly fades away, the probe underscores how deeply the 2016 election and the battle over its legitimacy continues to shape American politics. It also foreshadows a broader pattern evident in other cases, the recycling of past controversies as tools in present-day political combat, regardless of how definitively the historical record has already been established. Intersections and implications. The events described in the preceding sections, from the escalation of the Epstein investigation to the Texas redistricting standoff, from the Mike Flood town hall to the Trump-Bolsonaro entanglement and the Obama-era probe, might appear on the surface to be discrete political stories. Yet when viewed together, they reveal interconnected patterns in the current U.S. political landscape: the weaponization of legal processes, the erosion of public trust in institutions, and the increasingly blurred boundaries between domestic politics and foreign affairs. 1. Common threads. The first common thread is the politicization of accountability mechanisms. Whether it is the House Oversight Committee's subpoenas in the Epstein case, Bondi's investigation into the 2016 Russia interference assessments, or Abbott's use of civil arrest warrants in Texas, each case involves legal or quasi-legal tools being deployed in contexts where partisan motives are undeniable. Even when legitimate investigative grounds exist, the timing, targets, and framing often reinforce the perception that justice is applied selectively, a perception that corrodes institutional legitimacy. A second shared element is the erosion of institutional trust. The Epstein victims' letters reflect deep skepticism toward the Department of Justice. The Lincoln Town Hall participants' confrontations with Mike Flood reveal disillusionment with congressional representation, and Bolsonaro's defiance of Brazilian judicial orders, encouraged by foreign political allies, mirrors a broader global trend of challenging judicial authority. In each case, the relevant institution, whether it be a legislature, court, or law enforcement body, is depicted by at least one side as compromised or acting in bad faith. The third thread is the fusion of domestic politics with international alignments. Trump's intervention in Bolsonaro's legal saga demonstrates how personal political alliances can shape U.S. foreign policy positions. Conversely, foreign political crises become incorporated into American partisan narratives, with Bolsonaro's troubles framed as a mirror to Trump's, and vice versa. 2. Electoral consequences. The cumulative effect of these dynamics is likely to shape the 2024 electoral environment in both overt and subtle ways. On the surface, these controversies provide narrative ammunition for both parties. Republicans can frame the Epstein subpoenas and the Obama-era probe as overdue reckonings with Democratic corruption, while Democrats can spotlight the Texas gerrymander and Trump's alignment with Bolsonaro as evidence of authoritarian tendencies. However, the deeper challenge is that both parties are suffering from historically low approval ratings. Polls show widespread dissatisfaction not just with the actions of individual leaders, but with the perceived dysfunction of the political system as a whole. This means that negative partisanship, mobilizing voters primarily through opposition to the other party, may have diminishing returns unless paired with affirmative policy agendas. In congressional terms, the stakes are razor thin. The GOP's current House majority is narrow enough that a net loss of 3 seats would flip control to the Democrats. Redistricting battles like the one in Texas could help Republicans offset potential losses, but they also risk energizing Democratic turnout in targeted districts. In the Senate, Democrats face a more difficult map, with most vulnerable seats located in Republican-leaning states. 3. Risks for democratic governance. Perhaps the most significant implication is the normalization of perpetual political warfare. When each party anticipates that its opponents will use every available institutional mechanism for partisan advantage, incentives shift toward constant escalation. Gerrymandering mid-cycle, revisiting past investigations without new evidence, and using foreign policy to shield political allies all contribute to a governance environment where policymaking is secondary to power retention. In this context, institutional norms such as respecting the finality of intelligence assessments, maintaining the decennial rhythm of redistricting, or insulating judicial proceedings from foreign political influence are treated as tactical options rather than democratic guardrails. Over time, such a climate risks producing a feedback loop. As trust in institutions erodes, political actors feel less constrained by norms, further eroding trust. The convergence of these crises suggests that the U.S. is not simply experiencing isolated scandals or partisan disputes, but a structural stress test for its democratic system. The outcome will depend on whether political actors, media institutions, and civil society can reassert the primacy of transparent, consistent, and principled governance, or whether the navigating a fragile political landscape. The series of developments examined here, from congressional subpoenas in the Epstein case to the Texas gerrymandering showdown, from grassroots confrontations in Nebraska to Trump's entanglement with Bolsonaro and the revival of the 2016 Russia interference debate, reveal a political ecosystem under sustained strain. What binds these episodes together is not only their individual controversy but their shared demonstration of how legal instruments, electoral strategies, and partisan narratives are increasingly intertwined. In such an environment, the pursuit of transparency and accountability risks being perceived, and perhaps practiced, as political combat rather than principled governance. The challenge ahead for the United States lies in re-establishing the credibility of its institutions and the integrity of its democratic processes. Without a commitment to consistent standards applied without fear or favor, the nation risks allowing each new crisis to deepen the cycle of distrust, polarization, and institutional decay.